I'm going to share with you 2 ways of creating recurring Zoom webinars. And I'll also show you how to extend a recurring Zoom webinar in the event you need to extend it. So let's do this. Now, by the way, I'm using my business Zoom because I pay for it. I'm also paying for webinars. If you're not paying for Zoom webinars, whether you're paying for Zoom meetings or Zoom premium, that won't help. If you want to do a webinar, you have to pay for Zoom webinars, which is an add-on to Zoom. So schedule a webinar right here. That's where you start. Give it a name. I'm going to call this test. Give it some details, you know. You can use a template if you create templates. I don't use templates, but let's talk about when I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that on the 29th. I'm going to do it at 11 a.m. My duration is maybe an hour, maybe less. Adjust it accordingly. You have no limitations. How long can I do a webinar? I can do a 24-hour webinar if I want to. So choose a duration, time zone. Now, here's a couple things I always do, by the way. For my business webinars, I always want to have people authenticate, which means they have to have a Zoom account to either be a panelist or to be an attendee. A panelist is live on the webinar with you. Attendees are watching and listening to the webinar, and typically all they can do is use the Q&A or chat. But I always have, for my business ones, I always have them authenticate. For my public retail ones, I don't need to have them authenticate. I care about who shows up, but anybody can show up. A couple other things I always do for a webinar is I always enable practice session. That way I can show up early and I can go live on the webinar when I'm ready to go live. If I'm doing a free one, I often want to include the email address of those who are in the audience or attendees. And those are the primary things I do when I'm setting this up. There's a few other things I might customize. But let's go back to the question at hand. How do you create a recurring webinar? Option number 1, recurring webinar. I want to do it every week on Friday. And the date's already, the time is 11 a.m. and I can make a decision of how many recurrences I want. If I choose after X number of recurrences, I can go down to 20. However, if I choose just date, I can choose a date. I can go all the way out to November 8th, which is basically a year, in this case, 59 occurrences. This is the basic way to create a recurring Zoom webinar. Again, end it by a particular date or end it by a number of occurrences. I always have a password, and then I simply schedule that. Now, when I schedule it, you stop right here before you move, and you get the link. So you copy that link so you have that available, and adjust however you want to adjust to make sure it is what you want before you move on. Now I move on, I go back to my webinars, and you'll see this is my business one I have, but intermixed in this is also another one, 59 occurrences of this option, this webinar called test. Now let's talk about 2 ways to change this webinar. If I want to change the webinar series, then I go to edit, and you have to edit all occurrences to change the overall series. And now what I can do is 2 things. Number 1 is if I didn't choose enough time, I could extend this out. Now in this case, I can only go out to November 29th, which is 60 occurrences. It won't only allow me to do that. However, I could change it to less often. I can stop it on July 24th, and I can save that. And you can see that I have 44 occurrences back up top here, 44 occurrences. And if I go back to my webinar again, I will see those 44 right there, 44 occurrences in my Zoom webinar listing here. Now, that's how you adjust the number of occurrences. Let me show you a way that you create a never-ending webinar. Go to that webinar, hit edit all occurrences. Now, when I'm editing all occurrences, where it says recurrence right here is weekly for this duration, instead of doing weekly, do no fixed time. And when you do no fixed time, it gets rid of the date, it gets rid of the specific time, and it gets rid of the number of occurrences. Now, when I save that, you want to look at this again and make sure it's right. Manage this and make sure it's all what you want. You will see that the URL will be exactly the same. Everything will be the same, except what has happened is, if I go back to my webinars, you'll see that webinar called named test is not in here anymore. It's gone. Now, what has happened is at the end of this list, you'll see there's a section called recurring. And here it is down here. I have one already that I do on a regular basis. Here's the other one called recurring. That, again, there is no date, there's no time, there's no number of occurrences, but it's exactly the same as the previous version that I created, where I had the specific date, the specific time, and the number of occurrences. Recurring webinars work great with the exception of one thing. Let me show you what that is. I'm going to edit this recurring webinar. I'm going to make it, instead of no fixed time, I'm going to make it weekly. Now here's one of the big changes that you get. I can extend this out however I want. I get registration. I like registration because with registration, I can have them register once and attend as often they want. Attendees need to register for each event. Register once and can choose an event. Whatever the option is appropriate to your webinar campaign. But I like registration because when I have registration, let me save that. I have the ability under registration settings to edit this. And I have the ability to ask questions and ask custom questions, which I think can be very useful if you're using webinars for lead gen or prospecting. For me, it's a fabulous tool, but you can't do registration if you don't have recurring be on a particular day and time and number of events. I'm Teddy. I'm a LinkedIn and Google Workspace guy, but I use Zoom meetings and Zoom webinars all the time, and I hope this was helpful for you.